Our next witness is Mr. David Montgomery. He is the Vice President of Charles River Associates and co-head of their Energy and Environment practice. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored by your invitation to appear today. Although I am the Vice President of Charles River Associates, I'm speaking to my own conclusions today as an economist. I have actually worked on the subject of emission trading for close to 40 years. I made the unfortunate calculation, starting with my PhD thesis that turned into the first rigorous theoretical analysis of how a cap-and-trade program could actually be made to work. My testimony today is based on some of the findings in a report that was recently authored by several of us at Charles River Associates, and I'd like to submit that for the record, as well as my testimony, in order to try to provide backup for these statements.
Without objection, it will be included in the record.
Thank you. I think the most important point in my testimony is that no distribution of allowance value can eliminate all of the cost of capping emissions. Free allowances can only eliminate the necessity of paying the government for permission to emit up to the level of the cap. But even if allowances are free, businesses and consumers must still bear the costs of the actions that they need to take to get emissions down to the cap. I think this is the point also made by Mr. Sokol, and I think he is absolutely right on that. The cost of bringing emissions down to the cap is reflected in reductions in GDP and household consumption. Allocations do shift who bears the burden across industries, regions, and income groups, as would decisions about how to spend or return to taxpayers the revenues from allowance auctions. But it's important to keep in mind that there is never enough to go around in the allowance value, and completely insulating some parties only increases the share of the cost of achieving the cap that must be borne by others. The cost for the average family will be significant even after taking into account free allocations and spending of auction revenues. These impacts can't be predicted with certainty, but taking into account all of the provisions of the bill, in our analysis, on average nationwide the cost per household in 2020 could be from $600 to $1,600 per household. And we base this range on what I think are reasonable assumptions at both ends of the range. It's also important not to be deceived by these averages in looking at the impacts on any particular sector or group. The cost for for this hearing, I've taken a closer look at the regional impacts of H.R. 2454, taking into account the 50-50 formula for allowance allocations to local distribution companies in particular. Even with those allowance allocations, our analysis suggests that the regional impacts would be unequal and uneven. Impacts on household income differ across regions and appear regressive based on regional average income and the magnitude of cost increases. The wealthiest regions, the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and California, have the lowest cost, and the two least wealthy regions, which in our analysis are Oklahoma, Texas, and the Southeast, have the highest cost per household. The free allocations to electric local distribution companies according to the formula will also lead to different increases in electricity rates in different regions. Interestingly, there also seems to be an inverse relationship between regional income and the benefits of free allowances. The Southeast has the lowest average regional income and a 15% increase in electricity costs, while the Northeast has the highest average regional income and nearly no increase in electricity costs. International offsets and allocations to tropical deforestation also play a huge role in H.R. 2454. All the economic impacts I've discussed would be much larger if the full amount of international offsets allowed by the bill does not become available. And I think there are some significant questions that have been raised by recent studies about whether the countries that are suffering now from the highest rates of deforestation and forest degradation have the institutional capacity to meet the requirements of ACEs for governance of those forests. Let me turn to another topic I think is quite important. Despite some claims to the contrary, how allowances are allocated can have effects on the overall economy. It depends on the allocation formula. In particular, thinking about the allocations to LDCs, if free allowances are used to reduce energy prices seen by consumers, the incentive to conserve energy will be reduced and the cost of complying with H.R. 2454 will increase. Two other uses of allocations can also increase economic impacts. Technology subsidies that lead to uneconomical choices of technology, such as bonus allowances for CCS or use of allocations to interfere with the economics of fuel switching, will raise cost. Output-based allowances to industries can also lead to uneconomic choices at the level of output. The output-based award of allowances to specific trade-impacted industries has been mentioned a couple of times today. But it appears to me, based on the work we've done on trade issues, that it would be in direct violation of the WTO agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures, and would likely be ruled an actionable subsidy if any other country were to challenge it before the WTO. Everything about the WTO is murky, but this possibility seems to have gone unrecognized. And it needs to be carefully considered, because otherwise we might pass a bill into law that we'll later discover doesn't have any real trade protection at all. If any of these problems materialize, limited availability of international offsets, distortions created by free allocations, and I'd also mention, I discussed in my testimony, unnecessary regulatory measures that could raise costs by imposing the judgment of Congress and government agencies over the judgment of consumers in response to a cap-and-trade program. I mean, the bill contains many regulatory measures, but the idea of a cap-and-trade program is to put a price out there and let individual businesses and consumers make a decision. I'm in favor of letting the market work that way, but those regulatory measures, if they become binding, could significantly increase the cost of the bill and change it. Anyway, if any of these materialize, then the cost of reducing emissions to the stated caps will increase. I think that's relevant to the topic today because the higher the cost is of getting emissions down to the cap, the harder it is to use allocations to insulate needy portions of the economy from the cost, and the larger will be the cost that those who do not get free allocations have to bear. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.